Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on performative gender and religions in South Asia. Today we are going to discuss gender and performance in Sufi movement. So, we have to understand the Murid-Murshid relationship that is at the heart of the Sufi tradition. So, we see that Murshid being the expert, the preceptor or the teacher, and the murid being the disciple. This teacher-disciple relationship is analogous with or reflects the devotee's love for the God. So, the Murshid Murid, the teacher student or the preceptor disciples relationship carries the reflection of the lover beloved relationship and ultimately the relationship between the devotee and the devoted. So, the murid is a person who desires to spiritually advance in deen referring to religion, and this advancement, this journey happens under the tutelage of an expert who is known as the Murshid. A Murshid on the other hand is a spiritual guide who has achieved a proximity, a nearness with Allah or God or divinity through perfectly following his own Murshid's guidance. So, and so such a wise person, is applying Sharia outwardly and applying Tariqa inwardly, achieving ultimately Hakika and Marifa, right. So, we have talked about each of these, Sharia being the codified interpretation of the Quran, and Tariqa is the inward journey. So, we see that there is once again a parallelity between what the Sufi movement engenders in terms of the disciple teacher relationship and the gharanas, the guru akhras or gharanas that we have in the Indic tradition. So, just like the Murshid is responsible for taking the disciple from darkness to light, the word guru itself means taking the disciple from unawareness, from lack of knowledge to enlightenment, towards enlightenment. So, it must be noted that it is not the Murshid or the teacher's duty to perform some kind of karamat or miracles in order to prove his legitimacy or worth. He is not to be confused with any kind of a showman that is doing some catchy, claptrap, performance in order to draw attention and thereby gain some kind of quick popularity. So, generally we see in all religious or spiritual traditions, it is the disciple, it is the onus or so we see in all the religious traditions that it is the onus on the part of the disciple to journey towards the teacher, to the quest for knowledge, the thirst for knowledge, the desire, the impetus of learning should be there in the student, in the disciple. The teacher is not going to do anything attractive or some quick karamat or miracles to attract the student. It has to be the student's journey towards the teacher and the patience, the perseverance to learn from the Murshid or the Guru. It is similar in all traditions, right. So, some attributes of a murid or the disciple are as follows. So, tawbah or the station of repentance, Repentance is very much central to many of the Abrahamic religions. Even Christianity, places a lot of onus or emphasizes on the act of repentance, penitence, as a way of washing off or purging one's past sins. So, the station of repentance or tawbah, then we have zuhud or renunciation. So, renunciation of material or worldly pleasures is important in one's journey towards following, in one's journey towards acquiring what the Murshid has to give. If someone is too mired in or too much kind of full of worldly desires, then one cannot take what the Murshid has to give. Abandonment of family ties, which is associated with the concept of zuhud or renunciation, and then we have taqwa or fear of God. So, we do not go astray, we do not go in the wrong direction or wrong path. Then the concept of sabr or patience, right, because no good thing, no good knowledge, no wisdom comes overnight. In order for us to achieve that, there has to be certain qualities that need to be harnessed, that one needs to train with, patience being one of them. And then jihad al-nafs. Jihad al-nafs means struggle against the self. In other words, controlling of yourself. So, all the different instincts, animal instincts that we have, we say the same thing in Hindu traditions also. What we need to sacrifice is the inward desires or the inward negative pejorative qualities. It could be anger or lust or jealousy or envy, right, impatience. These are some of the negative human qualities that we need to conquer. That conquest is referred to as jihad al-nafs, the readiness to sacrifice and a state of seeking. We constantly need to seek for the God or the divinity in order to discover Him or discover divinity within ourselves. So, then another quality required of the murid is ikhlas. Ikhlas meaning sincerity, and then ilm. So, we see all these stages. Once a person is has renounced and the person has repented, not mired in worldly pleasures, patiently seeking the God, ready to sacrifice, struggling against the negative instincts within oneself, and that's when ilm or the knowledge of God comes, and ultimately there is submission. Submission is nothing other than Islam. Islam itself means to submit, right. So, we see that Sufism is speaking a lot with Islam. It is an offshoot of Islam and not quite a departure in many ways, just that it could be seen as a less orthodox branch, a more liberal and a more syncretic offshoot of Islam. But the basic premises, tenets and philosophy are quite similar. They draw on one another. Ghazali, who is a prominent Sufi, would say that to journey in the spiritual path is like shooting an arrow without knowing where it will go and what it will hit. So, the path of initiation of the murid is a path of tests, full of tests. The test from the initiator, the test from God, and then the test, the process of testing one's own self, as well as the testing through the worldly affairs, the worldly environment or milieu where one has to physically exist. So, to be able to go through and overcome or successfully meet these tests is the sign of real progress for the murid. The one who does not observe these tests will be losing his or her own time. So, the Sufi order and the world order imply certain ranks of initiators of the Murid-Murshid. So, according to the Sufi order, the Murid-Murshid has already acquired a certain rank, right? The Murid-Murshid has a certain rank and qualifies as an initiator. So, owing to his nearness to God, he can initiate another person, a murid, to undertake the same journey that he himself has taken previously, right. So, such a Murid-Murshid, an initiator who acts as a guide, who shows the path, must be regarded with respect as someone that has gone ahead in the journey and who is in a position, who is qualified to show the path to others. This law itself is not very different from the law of nature and from the law of life. So, there are three stages basically for the pupil or the murid to tread on the spiritual path. The first stage is that of receptivity, to take all that is given without discrimination. When the teacher is teaching, there is a kind of unquestioning acceptance or imbibing of what the Murshid has to give, right. The stage following that, the next stage after reception or receptivity, is assimilation of what has been received. So, once you have received knowledge, or you have received, you have acquired some kind of learning, certain qualities, you have been trained in certain way, now you have to assimilate what you have received. And the third stage is to put the learning in the mind and let the mind see the reason of things. This is more like application. So, learning cannot happen in isolation, and learning does not mean anything in isolation until we apply it to the worldly affairs, to the real society where we live. So, this is more about consideration, right. Once you have assimilated the knowledge, received and assimilated it, you consider, you deliberate on it, right. It is processing inside you, and the one who goes consciously and securely through these three stages of receptivity, assimilation and consideration is understood as a successful murid in the path. So, we see the figure of Abida Parveen, a noted Sufi singer, and Abida Parveen reportedly confesses in one of her interviews with The Guardian that she acquires a state of bekhudi while in the midst of a performance. The concept of being either a man or a woman does not cross my mind, is what she has to say. I am neither a man nor a woman on stage. I am a vehicle on stage for passion. So, the body becomes a carrier or a vehicle or a receptacle for passion to flow, and this passion flows from the singer onto the audience, to the witness of this performance, this rapturous performance. We see, Abida Parveen as a performer is, she emanates, she exudes in a nutshell, like many other Sufi performers, what Sufi philosophy precisely is. She has a very androgynous appearance, her voice is very androgynous, her way of dressing up makes her entire demeanor as so liminal, so beyond absolute definitions. That is basically what Sufi philosophy tries to say. So, she is in a state of bekhudi, she is beyond herself. So, there is a kind of transcending, an experience of transcending boundaries, transcending the boundaries of religion, transcending the boundaries of gender, any boundary that limits one's identity, limits one's self. So, bekhudi is being something other than or something beyond one's self, the social self that we are. She is regarded as the queen of Sufi music. So, Abida Parvin is a Pakistani singer of Qawwali, Sufiana Kalam and multiple other forms of devotional music associated with the Sufis of South Asia. She has been regarded as the queen of Sufi music. However, there are also men and women from within the Sufi orders who would give an impression that Abida Parvin is not really a Sufi, but only a singer of Sufi music. So, we have already talked about how all movements, be it the Vaishnavite tradition, the Sufis, they have many ramifications, many branches, some of which are more orthodox than the other. So, it is difficult for the more orthodox branches to accommodate the liberal tendencies, right, and they sometimes disown these tendencies and say that they are not Sufi enough, right, or they are not Vaishnav enough, right. So, these kinds of differences in nomenclature, where internationally Abida Parvin would be called as the queen of Sufi music, whereas some of the Sufi orders do not even claim her or kind of disown her Sufiness, belie a question regarding who a Sufi is. Who is the veritable Sufi? Who is the authentic Sufi? Do we have a definition? It hints at the intricate web of significances attached to the idioms of Sufism. So, in Sufism, gender is both material and immaterial, a shaper of identity, an obstacle on the path to purifying the soul and bringing it in proximity to the ultimate divine. And finally, gender is also a marker of the insider or outsider status within ritual spaces. So, gender has certain social meanings as well as certain metaphysical or spiritual meanings. The classical Sufi tradition configures gender as a correlative of spiritual journey. So, in other words, masculine and feminine rather than the outward biological traits refer more or connect more with the concept of qualities of one's soul. And we see the Sufi tradition saying that both male and female in varying proportions is present in all humans. So, both male and female qualities are possessed in varying proportions by each human being with respect to the state of his or her soul on its ascent towards the divine reality or conversely descent away from the divine. Now, once again this reminds me what the Vaishnav mystics have to say, especially this is very much a part of one of the oldest Bengali literatures called Charyapad. Charyapad is noted as the first written scripted Bengali literature, and it describes human body and human tendencies in a strikingly similar way. The Sufi order and the Charyapad have a lot of overlaps. So, Charyapad is talking about the body all human bodies, regardless of you know, regardless of the outward gender that we possess, having a Bama, or the Bama referring to the female, the feminine aspects, the Purush or the male aspects, masculine aspects, and finally also a neuter aspect which is known as the Avadhuti, right. And it would go on to say that when a person has attained that realization of oneness with God, the person is neither a Bama nor a Purush. The person has discovered the Avadhuti, the neuter that is flowing in the body. It's very beautifully described in Charyapada in very esoteric language. So, coming back to Sufi tradition, I am trying to see these overlaps, these simultaneity of different mystic traditions, which enable us to understand the continuities that flow in the Pan South Asian culture. The culture of performance, the religious cultures that are very, the religious traditions that are very performative in nature. So, we are trying to understand the Pan South Asian religions or spiritual traditions that are very performative in nature. Now, we see Sachiko Murata's seminal study on gender titled The Tao of Islam, a source book on gender relationships in Islamic thought, explaining the qualities, the gender qualities as being reflections of the inward dimension of the human being, particularly from the perspective of those who understand the human being to correspond to the microcosm, in which all aspects of the macrocosmic are reflected. So, put simply, the human is a microcosm onto which all the qualities of macrocosm are available, are visible, right. So, this is something once again that we find in Vaishnava tradition also. The Vaishnava mystics would say, the Sahajiya cult, right, they say that what is not there in the body is not there in the universe. So, these qualities of male and female are available, are present in varying proportions in different individuals. So, Murata's book says the following: for most authors of the intellectual tradition, the various names applied to the inward dimension of the human being do not refer to distinct and autonomous entities, but to different qualities or degrees of a single reality, right. So, they are not really distinct from one another. There is a continuity among the different individuals, the different creatures, different earthly creatures. It's just that each material body, each matter is composed of the same ingredients, but in varying proportions. So, some has the greater masculine qualities, whereas others have more prominent feminine qualities, and so forth. Later, Murata also says, I quote, "The human being is compounded of a large number of qualities, and the nature of these qualities can be understood by finding in the macrocosm the realities that make them manifest." Right? All these ingredients are also available in the macrocosm. The human is not outside of that. The human is not decoupled from the macrocosm, the universe, and thereby the God. They are continuities of one another, right? These qualities display the three directions of existence, by and large. Three large classifications of existence would be ascending towards God, which endows one with the quality of being angelic, then descending away from God, which endows one with the quality of demonic, and finally dispersive, referring to the quality of animal. So, in Islamic metaphysical spiritual traditions, gender as a mutable quality of the soul or nafs is a means for human beings to achieve spiritual perfection and ultimately union with the divine, right. From the general point of view of the Sharia, God's qualities are masculine in relation to his creation, which is feminine. So, we see that there is a continuation and yet a dissociation from Sharia interpretation of Islam. Sufism is more pliable, more flexible, where almost both genders are in tandem, both genders are simultaneous, exchangeable, they have exchangeable platforms, there is no hierarchy. So, there are greater possibilities in the Sufi tradition as the limitations are less. Sharia is more definitive and codified, it is telling very absolutely that God is more masculine, whereas the creation is feminine. So, it is creating it is understanding divinity in terms of hierarchy, and this hierarchy is very gendered in nature. It is thereby saying that feminine is lower than masculine, by saying that God is masculine and the created, the humans or the creatures are feminine. So, with respect to the general point of view of Islamic spirituality, which include but are not limited to Sufism, the stress is on God's feminine aspects, which exists within a greater masculinity conceived as all encompassing cosmos. So, Sufism focuses more on the feminine qualities in the God. We see this tendency as Sharia understands God more as a God as a lawmaker, a lawgiver, giver of justice, and that is the imagination of a very stern Allah, right, a very strict divine imagination of the divine. On the other hand, Sufism celebrates the idea of a kind and a very personal God that can be loved, right, that can be treated as one's lover, right. So, from the perspective of God's control over and identification with his creation, the creator is revealed by the mystic traditions such as the Sufi as both feminine and masculine simultaneously. That is where Sufi order is coming from, right. There is no special onus or emphasis on God's masculinity, right. So, neither perception nor the qualities inherent in creator or creation are static or fixed, right. So, there is a kind of flow, there is a kind of flux. All these qualities are in a state of flux. They fluctuate in response to the relationship between the creator and the creation. So, we have a number of Sufi poems where both the imageries and imaginations are available. The devotee being a feminized self, whereas and a bride seeking union with Allah, the masculine groom, right. Conversely, the God in many of Rumi's poem, the God is the veiled bride, and the veil refers to the earthly distractions that keeps us away from union with the God. So, the God is the veiled one, the feminine being or existence, whereas the devotee is yearning to unveil and acquire knowledge of that divinity. So, we see this kind of reversal, gender reversal, where there is no staticity, there is no fixedness, and in proportion to the stage of ascent or descent of an individual as he or she is progressing towards cultivating a consciousness of God, of absolute reality. These understandings or these presences of maleness and femaleness fluctuate, they change, right. So, the material plane alami nasut. So, alami nasut refers to the material plane or the outer manifestations of existence, which reflects the tendency of human beings to place themselves at the center of divinity or divine reality as different from other creatures, right. So, here we see Islamic masculinity and femininity are predominantly conceived in static and homogeneous terms. So, and this would be a more orthodox interpretation of Islam or Quran, where the man is fixed, has a very fixed and static social position as the breadwinner and the supreme authority, figuring in the household, whereas the woman or the wife is primarily running the household chores, devoted to the husband, home and children. So, it is very stratified, hierarchical way of laying out a social pattern, right. Social mores and conventions where the man is above the woman, and it cannot be the other way around in any way. That is where the more orthodox reading of religion comes from, and even human being above all other creatures, a very anthropocentric point of view, which generally inform all the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity and finally Islam. All of them see humans and, more strictly speaking, man at the center of creation, right. It's very not only homocentric but androcentric in nature. In this model, the man is routinely depicted as a spiritual warrior, so celebration of his hypermasculinity basically, whereas the woman is understood as deficient both in intellect and spiritual capacity, despite the presence of some of these great female adepts who defied such stereotypes. There were many female Sufi saints who revisited this kinds of stereotypes. They took Sufi order or Sufi cult and tradition onto a different level altogether. So, this kind of a codified and definitive interpretation or vision is predicated on an ideal of sex segregation, male dominance, and clearly delineates gender roles and relationships, right. Most certainly there are such counterparts in all religions. For that matter, in Hinduism we have Manusmriti, who is that is doing something very similar to Sharia. It is very codified, very definitive, putting man at the center of and the core generator of and enjoyer of this entire knowledge system. He is at the heart of the Vedic knowledge system. Women have been depicted in very narrow terms, where a woman can either be a var vanita or a prostitute, or she can be the household woman who is giving birth to children, and her roles are very distinct and defined in that sense. She cannot be anything beyond that. So, we could say that Sharia is very similar to Manusmriti in that way, and even the caste divisions are very clearly, in very clear terms, defined in Manusmriti. Right. So, Sufi literature and poetry is rife with examples of, ignorant women. Even Sufi, some of the orthodox Sufi branches are talking about, they reinforce the stereotype of ignorant women who manifest the characteristics of blameworthy souls that lead to evil. The biological and emotional conditions of the female gender have been understood by many male and female Sufis as an impediment on the path to perfection of the soul and union with the divine. And this I mean pertains to all the religions, starting and very prominently present in Hinduism. In Christianity, obviously, the story of Adam and Eve, where Eve is the cause of the fall from paradise, right. So, yet having said that, Sufis have also been known to challenge such received knowledge about normative models of gender. Several studies have exposed the ways in which the materiality of gender is challenged by the Sufi adept in the process of communicating spiritual lessons about the importance of community, the perfection of faith, and ultimately the purification of the seeker's soul. So, Deepak Mehta's study of a community of Ansari weavers in the Barabanki district of UP in India talks about the relationship between a Sufi Baba who is a local mystic and his fellow Ansaris. It illustrates how gender reversals that shape social relationships also blur the lines not only between masculine and feminine, but between spiritual and material exchanges in everyday interactions and in ritual context. So, Deepak Mehta's study of this community of Ansari weavers in the Barabanki district present in UP, India, is looking at the relationship between the Sufi Baba and his disciples, the fellow Ansaris. It illustrate how gender reversals that are responsible for shaping social relationships also blur the lines between the masculine and the feminine, as well as the spiritual and the material exchanges in everyday interactions and in ritual contexts. So, Sufi Baba describes himself both as a male and a female and is seen by others as embodying both the genders within his one body. That is very interesting. He enacts and reifies this gender ambiguity constantly through an affective relationship with his audience that encompasses his multiple roles in the community. Such a Baba is a spiritual performer and also has some very interesting social interventions, right. Multiple roles in which multiple roles through which he intervenes the society. So, he can have multiple functions in a community. Healer of women in his everyday medical practice, a liaison or go-between for the prostitutes and their customers, and a cross-dressing clown during the annual Chelam festival. So, we see that it is a very motleyed, a very layered identity that this person has, which is very much a departure from the seriousness that any religion entails. And this kind of a figure such as the Sufi Baba among the Ansaris is thriving in a at the margins with very marginal subjects as his as a part of his cosmos. He is dealing with the women who are marginalized gender wise, and then with the prostitutes who exist at the peripheries of any given society, and then dressing up as a clown. So, religion not only for edification, but also for entertainment. It's a very multifarious and a very interesting position that a figure like the Sufi Baba wears, right. A very interesting layered identity that he wears, and he claims himself neither as a male nor as a female. We will talk more about this phenomenon and this practice among the Ansari weavers in our next lecture. Thank you.